December 19th, 1959, Osprey, Florida, a tiny rural community near Sarasota. Cliff and Christine Walker live on a small cattle ranch with their two young children, 3-year-old Jimmie and 1-year-old Debbie. It's a quiet Sunday. Cliff's parents are supposed to come over for dinner that evening. When they arrive around 4 p.m., the house is dark. The car's in the driveway, but nobody answers when they knock. Cliff's father opens the door and walks inside. What he finds will haunt him for the rest of his life. Christine is lying on the bedroom floor in a pool of blood, half naked, shot twice in the head. She's been sexually assaulted. Cliff is in the bathroom, shot in the head. 3-year-old Jimmie is in the bedroom, shot in the chest and head. And baby Debbie, barely 1 year old, is in her crib, shot in the head. 4 people, an entire family, executed in their own home. This case should have been national news. It should have been investigated with everything law enforcement had. But it happened exactly 1 month after another family was murdered in Kansas. The Clutter family. 4 people shot to death in their farmhouse in Holcomb, Kansas. You might know that case from the book In Cold Blood. 2 drifters, Richard Hickock and Perry Smith, killed the Clutters during a botched robbery. They were caught, tried, and executed for it. But here's the thing. Hickock and Smith were in Florida when the Walker family was murdered. They'd left Kansas right after killing the Clutters and headed south. They were spotted in the area near the Walker Ranch. And the similarities between the 2 crimes are impossible to ignore. So did the men who killed the Clutters also kill the Walkers? That's the question that's haunted investigators for over 60 years. Let's go back to what happened. That Sunday morning, Christine took the kids to run some errands. She went to a local store to buy supplies. Cliff stayed home to work on the ranch. Sometime between noon and 2 p.m., someone came to the Walker house. We know Christine and the kids made it home because their shopping was inside, partially unpacked. Cliff was there too. His truck was in the driveway. Whoever came to that house either convinced Christine to let them in or forced their way in. Based on the crime scene, here's what investigators think happened. The killer confronted Christine, probably in the living room. At some point, Cliff came in, maybe from working outside. The killer shot him. Then they sexually assaulted Christine before shooting her twice in the head. Little Jimmie, who was 3 years old, was shot in the chest and head. And then, the most sickening part, the killer walked over to the crib where baby Debbie was sleeping and shot her in the head. A 1-year-old baby, murdered in her crib. The killer then went through the house looking for valuables. They found Cliff's wallet and took about $50, which was all the money the Walkers had. They ransacked the bedroom, pulled out drawers, went through belongings. But they didn't take much else. This wasn't a professional robbery. This was something else. The crime scene was brutal. There was evidence the killer had spent time in the house after the murders. They'd taken a bath or shower in the Walkers' bathroom. There were wet towels. They'd helped themselves to food from the refrigerator. They'd walked around the house calmly, not in a rush. The police found tire tracks near the house that didn't match the Walkers' vehicles. The killer had driven right up to the house, murdered 4 people, cleaned up, and driven away. The investigation started immediately, but it went nowhere fast. This was rural Florida in 1959. The sheriff's department was small, understaffed, and overwhelmed. They didn't have modern forensics. The crime scene was contaminated almost immediately. Dozens of people trampled through the house before it was properly secured. Evidence was lost or destroyed. They had almost no leads. There were no witnesses. The Walkers lived in an isolated area. Nobody saw anything suspicious that day. The police questioned locals, drifters, anyone who might have been in the area. Nothing. The case started going cold within weeks. Then in January 1960, about a month later, Richard Hickock and Perry Smith were arrested for the Clutter murders in Kansas. When investigators looked at their timeline, they realized Hickock and Smith had been in Florida right around the time of the Walker murders. In fact, they'd been spotted near Sarasota. Hickock had family in the area, and they'd gone to visit. Hickock and Smith were brought in for questioning about the Walker case. Both denied being involved. Hickock said they were somewhere else that day, and gave an alibi that couldn't be verified. Smith said they had nothing to do with it, but neither of them could prove where they were on December 19th. The timeline fit, the location fit, and the method was similar. Home invasion, family murdered, small amount of money taken. The lead detective on the Walker case became convinced Hickock and Smith were the killers. But there was a problem. Hickock and Smith were already going to be executed for the Clutter murders. Kansas had them. Florida couldn't extradite them for trial because Kansas had the death penalty case. So even if Florida could prove they did it, what was the point? They were going to die anyway. Hickock and Smith were executed in 1965. They went to their graves denying they had anything to do with the Walker murders. But the detective never stopped believing they were guilty. He kept the case file for decades, kept investigating even after retirement, hoping to prove it was them. For years, that's where it stood. Most people assumed Hickock and Smith killed the Walkers, but it was never proven. The case went cold. The Walker family became a footnote, overshadowed by the more famous Clutter case. Then in 2012, over 50 years after the murders, something changed. Cold case investigators in Florida decided to reopen the Walker case using modern DNA technology. They exhumed the bodies of Hickock and Smith to get DNA samples. The idea was to compare their DNA to evidence from the Walker crime scene. If there was a match, it would finally prove they were the killers. The problem was the evidence from 1959 was degraded. 50 years of storage in less than ideal conditions had destroyed most of the DNA. They tested everything they could. Semen from Christine's body, blood samples, hair, anything that might give them a match. The results came back inconclusive. The DNA was too degraded to make a definitive match. They couldn't prove Hickock and Smith did it, but they also couldn't rule them out. So we're back where we started. Did Hickock and Smith kill the Walker family? Maybe. The circumstantial evidence is strong. They were in the area. The crimes are similar. They had a history of violence and had just killed 4 people a month earlier. But there's no proof. If it wasn't them, then who? The other major theory is that it was someone local. Someone who knew the Walkers, knew they'd have cash from selling cattle. Someone who'd been watching the house, waiting for the right moment. The sexual assault of Christine suggests a personal element, something beyond just robbery. Maybe it was someone obsessed with her who saw an opportunity. There were other suspects investigated over the years. A man who'd been seen in the area acting suspicious, a drifter who matched witness descriptions, but none of them panned out. Every lead went cold. What makes this case so frustrating is how close we came to answers. If the DNA had been preserved better, if the technology had existed in 1959, if Hickock and Smith had been properly interrogated about Florida before they were executed, we might know the truth. But all those opportunities are gone now. Everyone involved is dead. The physical evidence is degraded beyond use. The case is essentially unsolvable at this point. The Walker family deserves better. Cliff Walker was 25 years old, a hardworking rancher trying to provide for his family. Christine was 24, a young mother. Jimmie was 3, probably excited about Christmas coming in a few days. Debbie was 1, a baby who never got to grow up. They were murdered in their own home, a place that should have been safe. The brutality of this case is what stays with you. Shooting a 3-year-old child, walking over to a crib and shooting a baby in the head. That's not just murder. That's evil. Whoever did this, whether it was Hickock and Smith or someone else, was capable of unimaginable cruelty. The case is still technically open. If new evidence emerges, if someone comes forward with information, it could be investigated. But realistically, after 65 years, that's not going to happen. The truth died with whoever pulled that trigger. So the Walker family joins the long list of unsolved murders. 4 people killed, an entire family wiped out, and nobody was ever held accountable. Somewhere, somehow, someone got away with murdering a family and a baby. That's the real horror of this case. Not just what happened, but that justice was never served. If you have any information about this case, contact the Sarasota County Sheriff's Office. Even after all these years, even the smallest detail could matter. The Walker family deserves answers. They deserve justice. Rest in peace, Cliff, Christine, Jimmie, and Debbie Walker. You deserved so much better.